Welcome back to another book review and book hot take. If you're new here, my name is Gabby. This is my channel where we do all things books. And today we've got a 2-for-1 because I read Doormat Mom's Doormat Mom No More, which I felt I was uniquely qualified to read and speak on because I do have my LMHC, a bachelor's in literature, and I'm recently recovering my relationship with my estranged father. If you don't know who Doormat Mom is and you're just stumbling across this because you're an estranged parent or you were just looking into the book in general, Doormat Mom is a TikTok personality. This is what she's made her living off of, where she talks about her estrangement from her children or child. She never really specifies, and she gives all of her hot takes, like, she's a good mom. She's one of the rare few good moms who this happens to in the estrangement epidemic, because that is what these estranged parents are calling it. And so this book has a lot to get into, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I want to kind of jump right into the meat of it from the beginning. To summarize the writing style of this book, Doormat Mom uses a gross amount of hyperboles, similes, metaphors to discuss everything in this book. And she uses a lot of, the only way I can describe it is boomer lingo, the same way that there's slang for every generation. She uses slang to kind of talk about these issues. And so a good answer is she keeps calling it her just desserts, that as a parent, she just wanted to gain her just desserts. And I still don't know what that means. And I'm putting that in quotes because she puts it in quotes. Because that's another thing. She loves to quote everything, but she's not actually quoting anything. She's just putting quotes the same way people put air quotes around things. She's using that in that context. It felt like every sentence had a comma that it didn't need. And she also talks about all of the accolades that she has gained from writing this book as somehow that validates her experience. So she talks about how she's been talked about in Newsmax and on Fox and in the New York Times, but she never says exactly what was talked about in regards to her book, just that it was talked about, and somehow that is supposed to validate that she's a good parent and that she is to be believed. Two things she talks about mentioning at the beginning that she says she's going to mention a lot, and she does, is God and her late husband. So her husband died, leaving her to take care of the 4 kids on her own. And very early on, she says that she stepped up to the plate to be 2 parents in one, and that could have made her an emotionally unavailable parent, but it didn't. And I'm just going to throw it right out. That's kind of giving guilt to me right off the bat. Doormat Mom, if you're wondering how she got here, she presents this story to us of being uninvited to her daughter's wedding, and basically gives that as the catalyst for the estrangement. But what she neglects to inform you of until chapter 6 is that the estrangement was essentially her doing. So she tiptoes around it until you get there. She basically tells the story about how her daughter contacts her and is like, hey, I want you to host the American version of my wedding, because her daughter's getting married in Australia. She says, I don't want you to come to this wedding. I want you to host the American version of the wedding. I know that might be upsetting for you to not be here, but since you're in therapy, I thought you could talk about it with your therapist and that it would all be okay. And this really chaps Doormat Mom's ass, okay? She's not having that. She instantly is like, I gotta go, and hangs up the phone and then talks about, how did I get here? That is pretty much the entire first 6 chapters. How did I get here? And we find out through her kind of reliving how did they get here, that after Doormat Mom hangs up the phone and is like, I gotta go, she decides that she's not going to talk to her daughter anymore. And then ensues a whole lot of things that you're like, this isn't helping you. So she goes on to tell us that essentially the main things she feels got them here, that when she looks back, she's like, I guess these were some red flags, is she tells us that she spent $360,000 on her child's education that she just had to have. Then her daughter got a very coveted job in the field and gave it up to travel the world. And she said she did not agree with this, but because she's a saint and not all heroes wear capes, naturally she's just supported her daughter, which is giving, I kind of fought her, but ultimately she told me she's an adult and she's going to do what she wants to do. And so that's what she did. And I can't stop her. That's what that whole section was giving. She then goes on to say that when her daughter was living the digital nomad life, and she is talking about it in a way with surrounding wording and context that lets us as readers know that she did not agree with this lifestyle, that she decides at some point she wants to do law school in Australia. She calls her mom, is like, hey, can you help me do this financially? Mom is like, no, I'm not doing that for you, which I think is fair. And about 2 months after that, it's a good thing mom didn't pay for law school, because she's now met a man that she wants to marry, and they've only been together for 5 months. Mom, again, without so many words, tells us that she doesn't approve of this situation because she just feels like there's no way he could possibly know her, but ultimately she gives the blessing to them because they're adults and they're going to do what they want. But she puts a lot of emphasis for the reader, and I'm assuming probably for her daughter at the time, on the fact that this blessing is a gift because her father is not around to give the blessing because her father has since passed. Well, upon the daughter saying, hey, I'd rather you host the American wedding, and Doormat Mom taking that as, she literally said, I was banned from the original wedding, she decides she's going to redact her blessing, and she makes it a point to know that she's also redacting the dead father's blessing. Not great behavior, in my opinion. She then goes on to share some other stories about this, saying like the things that she was sad that she was going to miss from the wedding is the fact that she was not going to be able to get ready with her daughter in the bridal suite, that they weren't going to have mother and daughter photos, that she wasn't going to get to cry alongside the other parents, and that she wasn't going to get to give a speech on her daughter's behalf for like from her and the late father. It's all reasons she wants to be there, not like, oh, I'm so sad I'm not going to get to see my daughter marry the love of her life, ideally the first and only wedding she'll ever have, this beautiful moment to watch her be a bride. It's all what I will not get to do, like actually physically get to do, not just like emotionally watch and get to do. She also shares stories about how her daughter sent her photos of the wedding dress and wanted her opinion, and Mom basically was like, I think it's too revealing and it's going to make everyone uncomfortable. And then the daughter is like, hey, why are you fat shaming me? And she's like, I never fat shamed her. And I think more realistically what likely happened was, as a fat person and as somebody who knows how society treats fat people, is that the comments were likely made because if this person had a smaller, more typical body, it wouldn't be deemed as inappropriate, but because she maybe is thicker or not built like that, it's giving too revealing. And that's fair. That's inherently fat phobic, and sometimes people don't realize that, and that's probably all their daughter was pointing out to them, is that it's kind of inappropriate. And also, like, when are parents going to get it through to your head that it's basically a rhetorical question? If somebody's saying, do you like my wedding dress? They don't really want to know. They want you to say, yes, you look beautiful, okay? So if you take anything from this video, it's that if your children say, do you like it? Just say yes. They don't really want to know. Doormat Mom also talks about why she knows she was a good parent in these first 6 chapters, and a lot of those things include, and this is where I think my therapy degree really is going to come into play, she says that she did everything for her children. She says she provided them with support, with love, with shelter, with food, and a warm place to stay. And to that, I would like to show you Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something that we're taught about in school. And I'm not saying this is for, by the way, any self-help I ever review. The last time I did this, you guys took what I said as like, I felt this was like an umbrella for everything. That's not the case. I do realize that there are exceptions to the situation and that not everyone fits in a box. This is just a general rule of thumb, things we should be considering. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs does state, right, that we have bottom tier things that are needed, such as food, shelter, things like that. In the middle is where we get love and support. And then up top is where we have self-actualization. This is how we become good, well-rounded people. This is bare minimum as parents. And this is something I think parents need to understand, especially when you have a child telling you, hey, you did not do enough for me. Just because you provided all of this doesn't mean that you also gave like love in a way that they needed to receive it, or support in a way that they needed to receive it, which ultimately helps them reach self-actualization. And I think a lot of parents feel that because they provided the bottom tier and some of the middle tiers, that inherently that makes them good parents, because likely they grew up with less than that. And to that I say, just because you had a shitty life doesn't mean that your kids have to have one too. She shares some stories about how her daughter interacted with other peers and situations growing up and how these should have been red flags. And in my personal belief, she does this to kind of discredit her daughter's emotions. So she shares about how when she was young, she always wanted to spend time out with friends and she tried not to take it personally. And that even now when her daughter was out In Australia, before the severance, the future son-in-law said to Doormat Mom, like, oh, it brought us really close together after spending the holidays together, because she was just so enamored with how my family did the holidays. She thought it was so beautiful. To which Doormat Mom takes very personally, and that's kind of like a theme, is that anytime her child is experiencing joy, she claims that she's not taking it personally, but then talks about all of the ways she took it personally but tried not to. And that is a very kind of concerning behavior. And then to kind of wrap that section of the book up, she basically says that over the next few months following the estrangement, anytime anybody asked her how the children were, she shared with them this entire story. So, like, not only did she choose to cut off her daughter and is now posing it as an estrangement by the child, she is sharing their personal information with everyone, discrediting her and making her appear ungrateful. And that is something that happens a lot. She calls adult children, specifically her own, ungrateful, brats, all sorts of name calling. And if you can do that here in a book, then what were you doing in the home, right? You can let her out now, babe. Please and thank you, because now she's making more noise doing that.
You're doing good. You sound great so far.
Thank you. She then tells the reader that when it comes to estrangement situations, there are two sides to every story, but she says there actually aren't two sides to every story. There's one story with multiple interpretations, and that doesn't mean that one person's interpretation is correct and the other one's is wrong. It means that the truth is somewhere in there. So basically a long-winded way to say there are two sides to every story. She also then addresses later on that there are two sides to every story, and that if you're going to go to therapy over this kind of situation, both sides need to be heard. So she kind of backtracks on her own statement. I would like to now give you this quote about narcissism from Doormat Mom. So I'm going to put the actual definition of narcissism right here while I read you Doormat Mom's. She says, what they call narcissism, however, is simply the moment loving parents become completely worn out from being exploited. I mean, a parent who tries to give her children safety, security, stability, support, and love. Notice that it says strive. I say it this way because that is all a parent can do, is strive and keep striving. No parent will ever meet perfection, and refusing to recognize this reality fails to acknowledge parents as being ordinary human beings. And to that I say, that's the bare minimum. When you bring a child into this world, there are a set of rules that you are expected to follow as a parent. And that is because if you don't, DCF will literally come and take your children away. You could get arrested. You could serve time in jail. When a child is birthed into this world, the only expectations they have are the ones you're putting on them, and they didn't ask for that. You did, however, ask for these expectations when you signed up to be a parent. When you chose to birth a child in this world and keep it, that is what you signed up for. Literally, like almost like a contract. You know that these are the repercussions of your actions, whereas your child did not. She frequently throughout the book blames the woke mob and the devil for estrangement, and specifically her estrangement. She says that the world teaches children nowadays, society teaches children nowadays, what they're learning in the home is bad and what they're learning in the world is good. And then she somehow makes this connection between that and God and states that the reason with children feeling that way, they're now not taking care of their families, which is inherently why our first world is slipping into a dystopia. It's very weird, the connection she makes, but that's the connection she makes, and I've got nothing to say about it because I don't understand it. She also says that kids are using the word abuse too lightly lately, and that they're using it to manipulate parents. So to that, I'm going to put the definition of manipulation up here. Around the same time in the book, she talks about nature versus nurture, and how there are actually more studies now that show us that nature and nurture is more like 50-50 to 60-40, and that's fine. I can handle that. But she goes on to say that that is why sometimes you end up with ungrateful adult children, even though you parented all of your children exactly the same. From a therapeutic standpoint, I have two kind of things to say about this. One is that you can never parent all of your children exactly the same, especially if you're having more than one, right? Because obviously, if you're only having one, you can only parent one way. But after that, with each child comes a new set of knowledge that we then adhere to the next child. So no matter what, different parenting is occurring even on that level. With how much she talks about God and emphasizes like the gender structure of her late husband to her and how she had to take on 2 and 1, and she does talk about gender quite a bit, it's also giving that perhaps she raised her boys and her girls differently. But I don't know, I wasn't in the home, so that is purely speculation. So that alone is 2 different ways to parent your children. On top of that, when it comes to the word manipulation, and I know she is using it to talk about adult children. So if you come up in my comments all, oh, just adult children, not actual children, I don't want to hear it, because listen to me first. Manipulation, no matter what, children cannot manipulate because it is a behavior that they have learned to have their needs met. And you have to ask yourself, 1, what needs is my child trying to meet? And 2, where did they learn this behavior to have them met? Kids are not born with those skills. That is not a nature thing. That is always 100% of the time a nurture thing. To have a kid who's more headstrong, to have a kid who is more argumentative, to have a kid who is more passive, that can be nature as opposed to nurture. But a child choosing to bend things to have their needs met, well, yes, by definition is manipulation. It is just them trying to figure out how to have their needs met, which they likely observed from somebody close in their life. And I'll say speculation, dad is passed, so they had to learn it from somewhere. She continues at this point to reaffirm to the reader that as long as you are meeting a child's necessities, that you're a good parent. She talks about this concept of good enough parenting to validate her point. And she says that as long as you are meeting those needs, you're a good parent, but that lacks the nuance of you can meet all of somebody's needs and still be an abusive person. She does talk about how if you are an abusive parent, that does deserve somebody to apologize and take accountability for, but she lacks the understanding of what is abuse. And so to kind of revisit that topic of abuse and her feeling like abuse is used too lightly, she deems abuse as, and I don't have the direct quote here to read from you, but essentially she says that abuse is like a heinous act that you wouldn't want done to someone else. And to that I say that that's not abuse. A lot of times people face abuse, and I'll put definitions of abuse up here, so trigger warning before I do that. Here they are. Is that oftentimes people face abuse and don't even know that they were abused. And it's not until they learn about abuse that they do. And she says that she even receives comments on social media about how abuse isn't being too loosely used. We just have more of a knowledge about it. And to that she says, nay. She also, it's a very weird situation, blames mental health for this crisis. She says that, you know, we are seeing the highest rates of mental health concerns and also the highest rates of people kind of breaking off from their parents, but then states that it's also the mental health professionals' like fault that this is happening, that they're encouraging children to do this. So that doesn't make a ton of sense either. She even goes as far to say that somebody once told to her, or like another story where they said maybe it's someone's opinion of something that led for this to happen, as in referring to an estranged child. Like maybe your opinion of mom and dad are the reason that you ended up estranged from them, not because that's who they actually are. And to that I say, hey mom, that's literally what is happening. Yes, their opinion of you is exactly why this has happened. And she even references Dr. Phil at one point and how she was like on the Dr. Phil show and somehow that makes her credible. And to that I say, Dr. Phil coined the term perception is reality. So if that is her reality, then we should be owning that, right? She tries to reaffirm the idea of being a good parent by stating that we shouldn't use grandchildren as pawns in estrangement. And to that I completely agree. We should never be using children as pawns in anything. But she says that if grandparents can be so sad and miss out on their grandchildren's lives so much and have so much love for their grandchildren, and you see that, then how can you possibly feel that they were bad parents? And to that I say, my mom once told me that someday your parents will be the grandparents to your children that you wish you had as parents, and you will hate them for that. You will be so mad at them for that. And I think any person with some sort of strained or complicated relationship with their parents can likely relate in the comments that this is true for them, that they watch their parents then be the most amazing grandparents and wonder, why couldn't you do that for me? If it feels like I'm jumping around, by the way, I just want you to know that I am recounting this to you exactly as it was written. I'm reading from my notes that I took literally as I was reading the book. She goes on to talk about trauma and how kids nowadays don't even know trauma. And she labels that she knows trauma, that most of these parents know trauma. So again, that gives this idea, right, that I've been through worse, you've been through less, so therefore you don't know anything. And again, I will repeat my feelings of just because your life was shitty doesn't mean your kid's life has to be shitty too. But in this particular context, she lets us know that what she views as trauma are things that happen while you're parenting to your children. So horrible diagnoses, natural disasters, great divorce. And to that I say, those are also traumas to your children. And she kind of almost seems like she agrees with that, and then carries on by saying that you then inherently inflict trauma onto your children while you're dealing with those traumas because you don't know how to navigate those traumas. And that's incredibly fair. It's kind of like you're so close, but not yet quite there, because she feels like because these were honest mistakes, they were caused by her not knowing how to deal with the trauma at hand, or other parents not knowing how to deal with the trauma at hand, that somehow you should, as a child, forgive your parents for only being human. And I think that that's a fair statement, right? We can forgive our parents for being human, but not if they don't acknowledge that what they did really messed us up. She also at one point talks about how she feels like this likely could have happened because her daughter was idealizing her late father. And I will say that that is likely a possibility. Anybody who's ever had maybe a parent that they don't talk to and a parent that they currently live with, especially while growing up, most of us can all attest to the fact that you have these thoughts of that other parent who's not around is the parent that could have saved you from this inevitable situation that you're in. This is why we often see kids admire their weekend warrior dads, or, you know, the mom that twirls into town for fun from time to time. And she also says that she believes that it's interesting and most kids end up wanting to estrange from their parents because we have a bias to remember negative things. And to that I say, sometimes it is true that you will likely remember somebody who bullied you more than you are to remember somebody who complimented you. And however, when we have loss, we tend to remember the positives. That's why a lot of times we hear people pass and all of a sudden everybody loves that person, because our brain, in an effort to protect us, gives us the positive memories. So those things can work both ways. She then goes on to share a lot of the positive memories she had with her daughter. She talks about tea parties and dress up and birthday parties. And I would like to give to any parent who may be listening to this and trying to learn more, the idea that with trauma comes memory loss. And so I think a lot of parents are great parents to children because you have this idea of what parenting a child is going to be like. You think about dressing them up and the way you're going to celebrate them and the way you're going to make things magical and holidays magical. And then those children become tweens and teenagers and young adults, and that is not somebody you ever thought you would have to parent. And therefore you don't know how to now, and you treat them like the other adults in your life who you may not treat very kindly. And that kind of trauma in those like from 10 to whenever can cause memory loss. So no, they don't remember the tea parties. And even if they did, it doesn't make up for all the crappy things you might have done when they were teenagers. Ultimately, the remainder of the book, she spends a lot of time talking about God and radical acceptance and how you have to give it to God and let these kids walk their lives as they want to and how they deem fit and love them from afar and so on and so forth. And I think what this entire book lacks to remember is that parent and child dynamics are a power dynamic that you're in for a minimum 18 years, but ultimately your whole life. So a lot of the book she spends saying that once your children becomes adults, and that's why she keeps saying the adult child, that somehow that means that you have to now just see each other as two humans and two adults in the world. And to that I say, that can never be the case because you have founded your entire relationship forever off of a power dynamic where you were kind of in charge. And at so many points during this, she gets so close and yet so far from the goal. Like she spends a lot of time talking about how in your radical acceptance, you should be bettering your life, bettering yourself in hopes that when your children come back and want to have a relationship with you, that they can apologize for their wrongdoings. And it's like, oh, you were so close. That is what your children want. When they don't talk to you and they say like, hey, why don't you go to therapy? They're saying, I want you to better your life. I want you to take care of yourself while we're not talking, because in the event that they do come around, there should be some reconciliation on both sides, right? Some acknowledgement I'm not saying necessarily kids owe their parents any type of apology, but keeping in mind that like maybe they do. Sometimes kids may realize ways that they could have behaved differently, but more often than not, the goal is that you are bettering yourself, so that way when they do try to reach out and do try to reconcile, that potentially there can be some sort of constructive conversation. And it seems like that's what mom also agrees should be happening. She just wants the child to do the part that the adult should be doing. And she feels that she's owed that. And very frequently throughout this, she says that she's owed never being put in a nursing home. She's owed being taken care of because, again, she provided Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And to that, I say, you're not owed anything. Again, you signed up knowing that this could happen. And she says that a lot. Like, once these estranged children have children, they need to realize that this too could easily happen to them. They do. They 100% do. They don't think that they're better than you for that. They know 100% they could raise kids who don't like what happened. And those adults who are now having children who are estranged from their parents, they are ready to apologize. They are ready to accept any feedback that their children give them. She ends us on the final, most telling note of this entire book, which is that she released this book the week of her daughter's wedding because she thought it would be cathartic. So if the rest of this book didn't tell you how you should feel, you are uncertain of what to make of it, I think that alone really does it for you. To give like an overall summary for parents listening is that just because you pushed out a child, which you knew came with these stipulations, these legal ramifications, does not mean that you are entitled to have someone take care of you in your later life. We could just hope that that is what happens. That no matter how much you push and try and shove to get your kids to see you like equals, they can't, because you raised them in a power dynamic where you were always in control, as to be expected and wanted, right? Hi, buddy. Hi. So all this is to say is if you like listening to me up, if you like what I had to say here, if you have any input, let me know. I really enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. I don't think I'll talk about it all of the time because it's not my primary and only interest, but if you want to see what other things I have in store, you want to check out some of my other videos, I would love for you to stick around and I would love to have you. So please like and subscribe and I will see you in the next video. So we'll see you in the next video. Oh, see you in the next video.